It's another week, another set of bad actors, malicious files, and compromised systems. On today's show, we're going to be talking about some of the cutting-edge intel being shared by our awesome community in the LimaCharlie Slack channel, and a huge thank you to all those folks that take their time to share the knowledge with the rest of us. If you enjoy listening in on these intel chats and aren't in our community Slack channel yet, then you should join the conversation. Much more information than we can get through on this show is being shared there, and you will get it in real time. You can join the Slack channel at slack.limacharlie.io. And as always, for these chats, I'm joined by the one and only Matt Bromley. How are you doing today, sir?
Chris, what's going on, sir? I'm doing very well. Very well. I got on my very limited edition patch shirt. A huge thank you to you for this, by the way. For anyone who's unaware, Chris and I just got back from a company offsite. We'll keep the location maybe secret, hidden, no, not sure.
I think we said it in the last episode, so
we might
out of the bag.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we just got back
down the tube.
Yep. During that time, Chris graciously surprised me actually with a patch shirt. Which, if you're watching the video of this, there is a video. You can see it's 6 patches all the way down. So huge thank you. But man, I put this shirt on. I just feel great. I'm in podcast mode, ready to rock and roll. You know,
spreading the gospel.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I got lots of people looking at me today, like, patch what? And I'm like, well, if you don't know, you don't know. And that's okay.
It.
But yeah, that's it. Don't want to be in your environment, right?
Yeah.
But no, nonetheless, looking forward to today's content. We got a lot of really cool stuff lined up. Obviously, we didn't get a chance to record an episode last week, which means we've got a little bit of catch up to do here. So let's get to it.
Yeah. We wanted to get one in under the palm trees, but we had the whole company together down in Panama. Sort of doing our yearly planning and all the good stuff that comes with being together. And there just wasn't time. I felt like I was just heads down most of the time, either getting some stuff done or just enjoying some relaxation with the team.
That's the tough part, is there were moments where it was like, I remember on Monday, we're like, yeah, we're going to find time to record. And then Tuesday came around, we're like, yeah, we're going to find time. And then Wednesday came around and we were like, I don't think we're going to have any time. And it was totally okay. I'm not going to lie, when you're like, on the water in Panama, or you're looking over the looking over the palm trees and stuff like that, it's really tough to be like, I think I'm going to go down there and get some work done.
Yeah. But being a remote first team, that time together is invaluable. And I can just feel everybody's so ramped up getting back to it, and we've got a plan and we're going to execute. So
that's right. That's right. Well, speaking of which, let's
do it. Okay, so we had a bunch of different tools and whatnot shared last week, so I figured I would quickly run through them in case they're going to be useful to anybody. So these are all in the form of like GitHub repos. Number one is called the MFA Sweep. It's a PowerShell script that attempts to log into various Microsoft services using a provided set of credentials and will attempt to identify if MFA is enabled. Depending on how conditional access policies and other multi-factor authentication settings are configured, some protocols may end up being left single-factor. It also has an additional check for ADFS configurations and can attempt to log into the on-prem ADFS server if detected. Probably a great tool for someone coming into a new org or simply trying to get a better lay of the land in order to make things better. Currently, MFA Sweep has the ability to log into the following services: Microsoft Graph API, Azure Service Management API, Microsoft 365 Exchange Web Services, Microsoft 365 Web Portal with 6 device types, that being Windows, Linux, Mac OS, Android phone, iPhone, and Windows Phone. Who's using a Windows Phone? And then it can also do Microsoft 365 Active Sync and, as we mentioned, ADFS.
Yeah, this is a great recon tool for anyone out there. Anyone out there. Assuming you're allowed to use this thing and it's been approved per your red team or pen testing scope, this is going to be a really good tool to test a set of credentials. I think it's another tool that will end up being probably, if not already, inside of adversary toolkits as well. One thing, I think that is important for folks to know about toolkits like this, where you've got kind of these automated testing and everything, there's actually some really interesting detections that could be built out from this. Number one is you might be able to see some of the login attempts, and there might be metadata left behind them to indicate, hey, this is the tool that's doing a thing, right? That would be a really good detection to put into place. In fact, I want to go test it right now. Another one might be just kind of the repeated attempts and stuff like that. So, admittedly, the script, and it does drop in a warning. I find this to be an interesting warning because it is definitely an admittance of like, this may not be legitimate. This script attempts to log into the provided account 10 times. 11 if you include ADFS. If the password you have is incorrect, this may lock the account out. So it is definitely one of those like, watch out. We don't want to lock an account out because that will trip some additional alerts as well. But nonetheless, this is one that I think is definitely going to be something that adversaries are probably going to already include their toolkits if they haven't yet.
All right. So the second one, I don't even know how to say this, but I'll give it the old college try. CVE2CAP BC or CAPEC.
I think CAPEC. CAPEC sounds right for some reason.
Okay, CVE2 CAPEC is a tool developed by GailiX that automates the process of mapping common vulnerabilities and exposures to common weakness enumerations, common attack pattern enumeration and classification, and the MITRE ATT&CK framework techniques. It generates a MITRE ATT&CK navigator based on a list of CVEs, providing a comprehensive view of vulnerabilities and their associated attack techniques. The tool's database contains CVE, CWE, CAPEC, and MITRE ATT&CK, as I just mentioned. It's updated daily to ensure users have access to the latest information. So a great tool overall, but especially for anybody trying to stay on top of compliance requirements. Matt, I don't know if you have any comments on this one.
Yeah, this one is actually like a really cool amalgamation of a bunch of different data points and stuff like that. CVE, CWE, CAPEC, and MITRE ATT&CK techniques all brought together. There is an online way to kind of test this out. I view this to really be an interesting approach for organizations out there who want to map CVEs to potential MITRE ATT&CK matrices, to like different MITRE techniques, number one. Number two, I like the fact that it automatically generates an attack navigator, which is kind of the graphical table or Kanban version almost actually of MITRE ATT&CK. Not that they're cards you can move, but it is kind of a columnar layout. But nonetheless, I really like this tool, especially for folks out there who are maybe in vulnerability management, are looking for like different ways to understand the risks that vulnerabilities may pose, and then also to map those back to different detections. So one of the things, Chris, that I always encourage folks to keep in mind when a CVE comes out or when a new vulnerability comes out, aside from patching, obviously, is to understand where this may impact the organization and what detections and things you may have in place. You know, back when I was doing a lot more incident response than I am now, I used to remember like having customers that I would speak to and say, hey, you know, there's this new vulnerability out. I know you use this piece of software, or I know this is something that you're curious about. You know, you might want to make sure you've got detections in place, or that logging and monitoring is where it needs to be, so on and so forth. And there were some times where literally it would be a 3-second conversation because we knew the detections were in place, and it was like, okay, right, the adversary can try a thing. I know I'm going to find it. Obviously, the inverse of that would be an organization that has no idea and is like, I'm not really too sure. This can be a great starting point to say, oh, okay. And I'm looking at the example website for CVE to CAPEC right here. And it does drop in a couple of CVEs. And then it identifies that, you know, in privilege escalation or defensive agent, it might be things like access token manipulation or create or modify system process and stuff. And that's a great way to line up with detections you might have in place. So I really like tools like this that give a visual approach to something that's usually very text-based. I think it expands the audience of folks that can consume it.
Awesome. Okay, the last one is designed to explore and exploit weaknesses in macOS sandboxing mechanisms, focusing on cross-process communication services. This tool helps security researchers identify vulnerabilities within macOS's sandbox restrictions, particularly targeting cross-process communication services in the PID domain, PID domain marked as application services, which often lack adequate protection. By leveraging this tool, researchers can test for unauthorized actions by sandboxed applications, such as executing arbitrary commands or accessing restricted resources. The tool aids in uncovering vulnerabilities like CVE-2023-27944. It lists a bunch there. I'm not going to read out the numbers because we have no context. Enabling Apple to strengthen its sandboxing protection. So yeah, if you've got a lot of Mac OS machines in your environment, this might be worth checking out. Again, these are just tools that have been shared with us in the Intel channel, and always worth taking a look.
Absolutely. 100%. And I won't comment too much on this one, Chris. I think you cover this one in good detail, but anytime we get to see an advancement or development of tools that contribute towards, you know, defender success and better detections, we're all for it.
Yeah, awesome. And as always, these will be linked in the show notes. So if anything piqued your interest, you can find it there. Yeah, love that people are sharing that stuff in the channel. Let's get to the news articles. First one up, Zscaler's recent blog discusses how North Korean IT professionals are increasingly finding remote work in Western companies, often under disguised identities. These workers are recruited by the North Korean government to generate foreign currency and circumvent international sanctions. Operating under assumed identities, they conceal their nationality and location, taking on freelance projects or remote roles, primarily in tech and IT sectors. North Korea uses specialized quote-unquote interview preparation programs to train these workers on how to avoid detection, focusing on Western work culture and language skills to blend into international companies without arousing suspicion. So that's some...
what an amazing campaign. What an amazing campaign to, and again, not to compliment any North Korean regime leaders here or anything like that, but what an amazing campaign to put together of this is like modern day espionage where like we're going to train this workforce and teach them how to ace Western interviews and whatnot. I tell you, Chris, the first thing that came to mind, because I've actually read some stories about what happened here, but you got to think too that they had to expose these individuals to the internet, right? Which is very locked down and controlled in that country. And I'll just leave it as I've read some stories about what happens when you expose someone who's, mid-20s, early 30s to the internet. They've never had it before. It's kind of like they're just like on websites all day long, just like, oh my gosh, I didn't look at all this information you have. And I feel like that's probably one like really odd takeaway is like, okay, I'm going to train you to be exposed to this thing on the, for the benefit of the country. However, don't look at the other stuff that's out there. And that's an interesting one. On the threat side of it, I think this is something that is actually a really smart form of espionage and like deeply embedded malicious activity and stuff like that. I think these are just like, it's a really unique way to be like, okay, we can train people to build a skill set that we know is in demand, number one. And then number two, embed them in our organization. It's like the ultimate persistence mechanism because they're supposed to be there. And they show up every day to work and they have access to things. And it's like, this is fantastic. Let's just take the data this way.
Generating revenue, building trust, and
Exactly. Doing all the things,
Okay, so Zscaler's Threat Labs team has identified two key threats from these workers, contagious interview and wage mole. Contagious interview refers to their elaborate interview training where North Korean workers are coached on Western slang, expected questions, and appropriate responses to avoid red flags. Wage mole, on the other hand, involves covert monitoring where North Korean handlers track these employees' incomes to ensure they remit a substantial portion back to the government. This level of control allows the North Korean regime to extract significant revenue from even relatively low-paying jobs, which collectively amass millions in foreign currency each year. The report also outlines indicators of compromise and tactics to detect these workers. Zscaler notes that compromised credentials, sudden changes in IP address, or unexpected work hours can hint at North Korean operatives. Threat Lab suggests tightening background checks and conducting IP geo-restriction enforcement to help organizations spot and block suspected users. What a crazy timeline.
I know. Now, I want to be clear and just say to everyone on here, sudden changes in IP address and unexpected work hours is not always an indication that North Korea is in your environment. Like, let's be clear. It might just be an indication that one of your engineers is on vacation. Okay. Let's be clear. Like, I've logged in at irregular hours before, but I was on vacation. So I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. I was in another location, but it was me. However, I think what this one, what takeaway like this is, first off, Chris, can you imagine like going through all of that training and you don't even get to keep a salary?
Is that right?
You gotta give it back. And that part, that's just gotta hurt,
Yeah.
Like, hey, what's your salary? 80,000 a year. You mean 10,000? No.
Yeah.
They said 80 in the letter. No. It's been changed to 10.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, like I find this to be like one that definitely could maybe up the ante for background checks and work performance and understanding where your workers truly are. And maybe there's an argument that a remote workforce video camera off is like not always the best approach, but the flip side of that is if you are one of those organizations where you're just hiring hundreds of engineers at a time and you're not really, paying attention as to who's who, I imagine it's probably not that difficult to slip through the cracks.
Yeah, especially if they're trained and have a whole program of deception in place. I can see it getting through. All right. Next up, in a recent campaign, GootLoader. Oh, it's the GootLoader again. GootLoader malware has been targeting Bengal cat enthusiasts in Australia using SEO poisoning tactics. Wow. Sophos discovered this scheme when investigating search results for, quote, "Are Bengal cats legal in Australia?" and, quote, a query that led users to infected sites. GootLoader, initially known for spreading banking trojans and ransomware, has evolved into a versatile initial access as a service platform with capabilities to deploy advanced post-exploitation tools, including info stealers and remote access trojans, like GootKit. By hijacking popular search terms, attackers manipulated Google's algorithms to rank these compromised sites prominently in search results, thus attracting unsuspecting users to download malicious files under the guise of legitimate answers or downloads. On clicking these misleading links, users unknowingly initiated the download of GootLoader's payload in a .zip file named to match the search topic. Sophos' threat hunting team discovered that once his payload executed on a victim's machine, it dropped a JavaScript file that executed further code for persistence and control. The malware's persistence mechanism included creating a scheduled task to continually run the payload, effectively establishing an ongoing foothold in the infected system. This allowed GootKit, the campaign's second stage payload, to act as a Trojan, accessing stored data and enabling attackers to push other malware such as Cobalt Strike for deeper network infiltration or ransomware deployment. I find the search term they targeted super interesting.
Yeah.
Like, is that a highly targeted watering hole, or are they just, there's a lot of people that want Bengal cats in Australia?
Maybe there's a lot of people at Sophos who want Bengal cats in Australia. I'm not really too sure. I find that I think that is like such a fascinating way to just kind of like bring this up. You know what I mean? I will admit that I do find it interesting that like someone somewhere figured out that, you know, Australians, or I guess the idea of having a Bengal cat in Australia was like a really popular search term, probably amongst a targeted demographic, right? That they're going after. And it's interesting that like they were able to zoom in on that. I think this is a fascinating article. Hat tip to the folks at Sophos, who we'll talk about again in a minute, but hat tip to the folks for like kind of talking about and blogging this. I find this one to be a really interesting story, Chris, just because like SEO poisoning and that kind of stuff isn't necessarily a new technique, but I find this to be like hyper focused on probably a particular demographic and stuff like that, which then subsequently led to, you know, this full watering hole that we talked about and all the different attack techniques. From a detection perspective, we're not talking super advanced and stuff like that, right? Scheduled tasks, JavaScript, Python, so on and so forth. It's not that crazy. But the initial starting point of someone who is able to figure out like Bengal cats being legal in Australia is a topic we're interested in. It goes to show just how deep we can get with particular search terms and maybe how much abuse can occur of those. Like SEO poisoning can actually be really effective for threat actors to take advantage of. And I know you're going to cover some of the additional like malware techniques in just a moment here, but I find this to be one of like, first off, obviously be careful on your search results. If you're, you know, downloading something, which is a particular search result, watch out. That doesn't sound regular at all. It doesn't sound like a normal workflow. But then the other side of that is it also speaks a lot for having kind of base layer detections in place, because it may be a really unique or niche entry vector, but once the malware gets on the system, it gets normal real quick. And I mean like normal in the context of adversary techniques and software use and some malware use and whatnot. So like, if you want to detect this type of thing, that's already there. But I did just find it fascinating to be like, you know, again, Chris, I often visualize these things on this show, right? And I'm imagining that there was a discussion at one point, maybe over some beers or I don't know, November, October hacker planning session or whatever it was. And someone's like, hey, you know what search term is really on the rise right now? Bengal cats in Australia. And it's like, let's go after that. Or like, you got to wonder, was it the people that we're targeting or the organization that we want to target is conducting these searches? It's a fascinating like starting point. I think I'd love to know how they got there.
Yeah, I find it extra interesting. We have a Bengal cat, so it's like really? Maybe I fit a profile or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize we were as close to home on this one.
The thing's wild. It's like, it's like having a wild animal in your house.
That's actually
Anyway,
pretty cool.
yeah, the investigation showed that each download's file names were slightly altered, likely to bypass common detection methods. In addition to modifying file names, GootLoader applied advanced JavaScript obfuscation techniques, making it challenging for detection tools to interpret the file's intent. The malware's obfuscated scripts even included fake licensing information to appear more legitimate. Despite these measures, Sophos's MDR team succeeded in decoding portions of the script, confirming it as a new GootLoader variant distinguished by its reliance on SEO-poisoned topic-specific bait. This campaign emphasizes the expanding use of social engineering tactics combined with technical evasion, posing a persistent challenge to defenders aiming to protect users from increasingly targeted malware like GootLoader. So yeah, it's like no specific thing being super advanced, but sort of coupled with the social engineering and the targeted nature of it, it does become a pointed threat.
It does. Yeah. And I find this one, again, I just think, and we're going to talk about it in our next one as well, but I really am interested when you see threat actors kind of combine a bunch of different techniques, but SEO poisoning is one that I think is always going to be very interesting because it's such a dynamic field, but you got to think to yourself, trying to master SEO from a legitimate company or marketing perspective is like, okay, how do I make sure I always show up when someone searches for, plumbers in North Texas or something like that, right? Just to give myself some geographic references here. That's one thing, because that's a search that's going to happen again and again and again and again, right? The flip side of that is like, how long do you think the trend of asking about Bengal cats in Australia is actually going to last?
Yeah.
Right. It seemed to me like one of those things that there was probably a few TikToks made about it. It might have been on Instagram a couple of times. Yeah. And it might last a few weeks or something like that. But you got to think like during that time frame to be able to mobilize and take advantage of that SEO so quickly. It's really, it should give pause to a lot of defenders out there, right? Of like, you never know where the entry vector is going to be. And sometimes it might be something as unique as like someone watching the TikTok video, they go to their work computer, they search for a particular thing, and then they end up getting, a drive-by or some sort of download or something like that, which makes you wonder, like, was the TikTok video the actual lure that was sent out as opposed to the SEO poisoning?
6D chess time.
You never know. I'm just saying.
Never know.
It's like, imagine that, Chris. Let's go down that road really quick here. Yeah. Someone starts an internet trend on TikTok or ByteDance or Instagram or whatever, and that leads people to opening a bunch or running a bunch of Google searches, which lead to a bunch of SEO poisoning, which lead to a bunch of watering holes and whatnot. And it's like, how did all this start? And it's like someone started a viral video that led to a thing. And what a cool story, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to give adversaries compliments. I don't do that, but that's the long game.
Yeah,
right there. That's the real long game.
Deep thinking there.
Oh yeah.
All right. After a multi-month absence, the malware loader FakeBat, also known as Eugene Loader or Loader, has resurfaced distributing malware through Google Ads, with a recent campaign exploiting ads for the popular app Notion. Using sophisticated brand impersonation techniques, attackers crafted fake ads that closely mirrored official Notion branding, deceiving users into clicking a malicious link. From this initial click, the campaign routed users through a chain of URLs involving a tracking template and cloaking domains before leading them to a decoy page that dropped the FakeBat payload. This obfuscation allowed the ad to avoid Google's detection systems, making it appear legitimate to non-targeted users who were redirected to Notion's real site instead. Upon clicking the fake Notion ad, users downloaded a payload embedded with PowerShell scripts, which carried out various fingerprinting checks to avoid analysis in security sandboxes. Security researchers identified the campaign's second-stage payload as LimaC2, an info-stealing malware known for extracting credentials and other sensitive information. FakeBat used an outdated AMSI, or anti-malware scan interface, bypass script from April 2024 to evade detection, demonstrating that even older evasion techniques remain effective in the wild. In addition, the campaign utilized a .NET reactor obfuscation, hiding the payload's content until it could be decrypted and injected into legitimate system processes like msbuild.exe via process hollowing. Wow. So this actually sounds like a pretty well laid out trap where they are fingerprinting users, deciding if they're worth sending the secondary payload. And if not,
It
they
is.
send them on to Notion and it looks like a real ad. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this one was another interesting one to read because of the amount of work that goes into the background. You know what I mean? The whole idea of, again, like I just want to identify for everyone who's listening here, like each one of these things in isolation is not unique or new or novel or anything, but the idea and just like the thought planning and the process of like, okay, I know a bunch of people are interested in Notion. I'm going to create fake ads that look like the Notion site. And then I'm going to, direct them to download a certain thing. And if I'm not mistaken, I think if you're reading the article, I think it was like the Mac version in one particular ad was legitimate. The Windows version was malicious. And I find that to be really unique as well, because it's just another step to make it appear legitimate to folks, right? Which I find funny, Chris, because actually a lot of sites these days that have apps in addition to a SaaS or a browser-based platform will often detect which operating system you have and will then say, they'll automatically download, like, I recognize you're on a Mac, so I automatically download the Mac version and I don't have to think twice about it, right? Whereas in this case, they actually didn't do that. They offered both buttons available, Windows or Mac. That actually mirrors what you'll see on certain versions of Notion. And it got the users to get in and click in and just, again, they deal with all the things and whatnot. And I find it to be interesting because, again, in isolation, none of these things are malicious. But when you put them all together this way, someone sat down and said, we're going to target people who are going after Notion. We're going to, register these fake ads. We're going to promote them. We're going to get them rising to the top of the pile. And we're going to end up with persistence and an implant. And it's just a really unique novel and a unique campaign that was put together.
Yeah.
Admittedly, like I've said before, once you get past the entry vector, it's like the same old stuff, right? Malicious PowerShell scripts, encoded data, so on and so forth. But other than that, it's a really, like, they're even using Pastebin. I mean, come on, like, what year is it? But nonetheless, again, interesting campaign. Lots of stuff to detect in here for anyone who might be worried about this one. But I think the user education part of this is just watch out. Those sponsored ads does not mean they're legitimate. It just means someone's paid to put them there.
Yeah. And strictly a numbers game, they're percentage of a percentage of a percentage, and they still get to pwn a few people at the end of the game.
100%.
This malvertising resurgence highlights a persistent issue of brand impersonation and misuse of legitimate platforms for malware distribution. Google's transparency reports show that threat actors behind FakeBat frequently update their cloaking and obfuscation techniques, likely to adapt to detection advancements. While the use of cloaked ads through Google Ads isn't new, the FakeBat campaign showcases how well-funded attackers are able to mask malicious code under seemingly authentic app ads. Security researchers and cybersecurity tools are monitoring for new instances of this loader, especially as such campaigns may soon pivot to impersonate other widely used software to further broaden their reach. So, stay safe out there, folks.
That's right. Never know where your Notion ads are going to lead to.
All right. And I feel like we're going to end up going down going a little long today, but I know we wanted to chat about this last one. So over the past 5 years, Sophos has been engaged in a complex battle against Chinese state-sponsored cyber adversaries targeting its firewall products. This prolonged engagement, detailed in Sophos' Pacific Rim report, reveals a series of sophisticated attacks aimed at exploiting vulnerabilities in internet-facing devices, particularly those within critical infrastructure sectors across South and Southeast Asia. The adversaries employed novel exploits and customized malware to conduct surveillance, sabotage, and cyber espionage, with tactics overlapping those of known Chinese nation-state groups such as Volt Typhoon, APT-31, and APT-41. The initial intrusion occurred in December 2018, targeting a low-privilege computer at CyberRoam, a Sophos subsidiary in India. This attack utilized a previously unseen rootkit, later named Cloud Snooper, and exploited a misconfigured Amazon Web Services Systems Manager agent to pivot into cloud infrastructure. This incident marked the beginning of a series of campaigns where adversaries targeted internet-facing services, including user and administrative portals, exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities to gain root access and install malware on devices.
Chris, this was, first off, like one of my favorite articles from 2024. I think just the level of detail and the level of like technical walkthroughs and everything that were provided by the Sophos team is just awesome to see. Number one. I mean, we got a timeline going all the way back. It's a 5-year campaign going all the way back to December 2018. So we're almost actually 6 years on. Number one. Two is there is such a like really, really well depth and well documented kind of technical side of this, where they're talking about, hey, you know, the targets that adversaries went after, the things that they were going after, and how they did it. And I love that side of things. But I also love some of the key high level takeaways, and some of these I think you're going to cover, but it does focus on edge network devices and talks about the value of those devices to adversaries for initial access and then also persistence into the environment. And I think that steps away a little bit from what folks expect to see. When we say persistence, people imagine services, scheduled tasks, operating system based things, but a vulnerable edge device is in itself a valuable persistence mechanism as well. And then it also goes into how, look, these are state-sponsored, nation-state nexus adversaries utilizing 0 days and known vulnerabilities here. We talk about these all the time on this show. We talk about these vulnerabilities and we joke about patching a little bit here, but there's a very, very realistic representation of how much adversaries use these things. Mm-hmm. I know you've got some insights into some of the additional vulnerabilities and whatnot, but I just want to call this out as a really critical report that goes through some of the more modern things that adversaries do these days and how they kind of chain these different events together.
Yeah, especially the internet-facing devices. You know, we always talk about being able to search this stuff up on Shodan, and it's like the day one vulnerabilities. Like if you're not on top of that patching, it's very easy for folks to have a program in place to exploit these and get a foothold somewhere.
Absolutely. And then I think the part that you're about to get into talks about the operational relay box networks. And I think this was another really unique part of this campaign, and what Sophos tracked out was not necessarily like every victim of the threat actors was not the target, if you will. And I know that sounds a little odd, but if I want to disguise my traffic or make it look like it's coming from somewhere else or bypass geolocation firewalls or detections and stuff like that, I'm going to hack a company and I'm going to insert my, malware and maintain persistence inside that environment so that it looks like I'm coming from that environment. And I find that to be just, it's not unique. It's not novel. I saw this done, we saw this done in the early 2010s or late 2000s, where it was like using hot points and everything like that. But it's a lot of infrastructure to manage. So again, I don't want to compliment adversaries. I just want to mention the size of these operations, because not only do you have your victims and targets, you've also got these compromised jump spots you've got to work from. And you've got the memory, you've got to remember all these networks and what's deployed where and geographies. And it's crazy stuff to go into it. I know there was a vulnerability you're about to go over as well, which is something that we also saw the adversaries use. But all of this was in building this massive network in order to break into the ultimate targets.
Yeah. Budget's not an issue for the APTs, right?
No, it's not. No, it's not. And I'm envious sometimes.
So in April 2020, the Asnarok attack exploited a SQL injection vulnerability known as CVE-2020-12271 to install a Trojan on targeted devices. Subsequent attacks, such as those exploiting CVE-2020-15069 and CVE-2020-29574, demonstrated the adversary's evolving tactics and persistence. Sophos' defense measures included deploying telemetry to detect and neutralize these threats. That sounds funny. Sophos' defense measures included deploying telemetry. How do we deploy telemetry? I won't get stuck on that, but that sounds funny. Leading to the discovery of a vast adversarial ecosystem. The adversary's objectives extended beyond immediate exploitation. They aimed to establish long-term persistence within targeted networks. This involved creating complex, obfuscated attacks that were challenging to detect and mitigate. The attackers' focus on perimeter devices underscores a critical need for organizations to secure internet-facing services and maintain robust patching management practices.
Patch.
That. Yeah.
That's right. No, this is another example where it's a risk versus reward assessment every time one of these CVEs gets announced. But when you have state nexus or advanced threat actors like this who are ready to quickly weaponize and take advantage of these vulnerabilities and things that are out there, I think it just accelerates the timeline. And really puts the focus on like we don't have much time here when these vulnerabilities are announced. And the question of, is this thing operational? And we've talked about this, I think, on an episode 2 or 3 weeks ago. We talked about if it shows up on that like seen in the wild list, it should elevate your concern and care. And this is another example why. The moment something like this is seen exploited in the wild, that question of has this thing been seen in the wild? I don't want to wait, right? Because but some environment out there has to be first, and you don't necessarily want to be the one where you're like, oh, we're the first ones. It's not like being to a party where you show up early and you get the gift bag earlier or something like that. You know what I mean?
The YouTube
when you're
comments.
The first one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to hashtag first. I don't want that. I would rather patch first before we get there. But nonetheless, I think, this campaign, definitely recommend any blue teamer read through this one and understand the different techniques. And then also think about different detections to be put into place and wrap protections and telemetry, not that we deploy it, but gather it from these edge perimeter devices. Just because they're facing the internet doesn't, obviously increases their ability for attack, one, but two, it doesn't exonerate them from proper logging mechanisms and stuff like that. Like that's got to be a consideration as well. So keep those things in mind.
Okay, so Sophos's response to these threats included collaborating with law enforcement, public-private partners, and government agencies to share intelligence and develop mitigation strategies. The company also emphasized the importance of organizations minimizing internet-facing services, prioritizing patching, enabling automating hotfixes, and creating plans for dealing with end-of-life devices. These measures are crucial in strengthening security postures against nation-state adversaries targeting critical infrastructure. The Pacific Rim report serves as a call to action for the cybersecurity industry to address the widespread exploitation of edge network devices. It highlights the necessity for a collaborative approach in understanding and mitigating the evolving behaviors of state-sponsored cyber actors. By sharing intelligence and implementing robust security measures, organizations can better defend against sophisticated threats, again, targeting critical infrastructure worldwide. So yeah, I think that is going to be a bigger and bigger theme over the next, 2 to 5 years. I'd say the next decade, but who can see that far? I think we are going to see some major critical infrastructure attacks at some point, especially given how unstable things seem to be getting.
100%. Can't agree with you more. And I think this is definitely a call to action for any defender out there or anyone who's maybe find themselves in an industry that's within the crosshairs of threat actors like this. I mean, there's a lot to take out of this, from perimeter devices to adversary techniques to CVEs to patching to how adversaries do what they do. And my big recommendation for everyone would be read this report and go through and start creating checklists for your own environment. And if it's an industry that is under heavy attack, or if there's a timeline of interest here or something, there's a lot of takeaways. Get those detection mechanisms in place and just understand that there are adversaries out there who, you don't necessarily need to be the ultimate target, but you will be part of the process if you leave yourself vulnerable and out there. And then you're just a hot point for malicious activity, and that's never a good thing to be.
Yeah, and we're talking about water and electricity and communications and finance, and these are very important systems to keep everything running. So do your part, join the cause. I feel like we need some propaganda posters to send out to folks.
100%. Yeah. 100%. But yeah, I hear that.
Awesome, Matt. Thanks for coming out and doing this with me again. Never gets old.
Chris, always a pleasure. And thank you again for the patch shirt.
Yeah, we might have to make a little run of those. I think they're pretty good.
Well, we'll see. I'm going to challenge anyone who's listening. Not that there's any to give away right now, but I'm going to challenge anyone who's listening to, if you made it this far into the episode, hit Chris or myself up, and there might be a swag pack from LimaCharlie involved. Not a patch shirt. This is unique, but if you made it this far, hit us up in DM. We always love to hear how folks like the show or any comments or feedback we can make. So with that said, Chris, until next time.
All right, sir. Take care. Bye.
See ya.